Hey everybody, it's John Pollock here alongside Cody Saftik, and as we get to the end of the year, Cody, it's been a loaded number of shows for the UFC where just about every champion has been in rotation from September until the end of December. So you get a great stretch at the end of 2016, but now we start to look at what your available options are for 2017. They have announced January 18th, they're going to be running the Honda Center in Anaheim the same night as Bellator is going to be at the Forum in LA with Chael Sonnen and Tito Ortiz. Then they come back 3 weeks later at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn after just doing an enormous gate at Madison Square Garden for UFC 209. And it makes you wonder what are going to be your headliners, because we know Ronda Rousey isn't turning around that quickly. We know Conor McGregor isn't around until May at the earliest and probably held off till International Fight Week. So there are your two biggest draws. George St-Pierre is really up in the air, though I think gained some leverage out of this situation the UFC's in for the first few months. And then you go down the list of champions, Cody. There are not a ton of options because of such quick turnarounds. And even in the case of a Stipe Miocic, who hasn't fought since September, he's going to be fighting Velasquez or Verdum, who fight December 30th. So that's not realistic.
No, it's too quick of a turnaround to try to get on UFC 208, and then UFC 209 is something 5 weeks after the Cain Velasquez fight with Fabricio Verdum. So if that takes Stipe out of the question, then what do you do with Stipe? I know Alistair Overeem versus JDS would be a fight that they're kind of discussing potentially for 209, but at least it makes sense to pretend you can't go Overeem, obviously. But JDS versus Miocic in a rematch for a 5-rounder for a belt, that could potentially be something that you could put on like UFC 208, 209. I would think that the move for 209 would be put the Diaz brothers on it. Yes, it's at the Barclays instead of California, but I think that there's a big demand for the Diaz brothers, both of them in particular. And if you put Nick Diaz, if you can put a fight against Tyron Woodley together for the title, I know people are going to be very upset. Why isn't Stephen Thompson getting the rematch? But that's the bigger business fight. If you can't do that, people are also going to be upset. But you could do Nick Diaz versus Michael Bisping for the belt as well. So there's options, and I think the Diaz brothers will be very pivotal for trying to sell some pay-per-views in that intermediate.
Well, the key here as well is the fact that, you know, so much we just associate, well, title fight, and that means main event. It doesn't always mean viable main event in terms of what it's going to generate on pay-per-view and selling out an arena the size of Barclays Center. And to be honest, Stipe Miocic against Cain Velasquez or Fabricio Verdum, that is not selling out Barclays Center on its own. And that's why a Nick Diaz has a lot of leverage, because he is someone that you can insert there. Yes, you will upset some people that Nick Diaz is leapfrogging Thompson for the rematch. Poor Damian Maia, who will be on the sidelines. But that is a no-brainer, Cody, about what the biggest business fight is. Can Nick Diaz fill Barclays Center? I'm much more confident he can, challenging for the title, than anyone else at 170 pounds, minus George St-Pierre.
Well, people always have, as you mentioned with the title fight, it's not any title fight's going to sell a pay-per-view. And we've looked at that historically with the numbers that Demetrius Johnson, yes, he's a great champion, but the numbers are not there. And I think
Bisping and Dan Henderson, I mean, that had a great story going into it. That was not a rousing success. It was a live event success. The Manchester Arena sold out instantly, but that was not a massive hit on pay-per-view.
No, and I would imagine they're not looking to do 250,000 buys, 300,000 buys for a pay-per-view. So when you think about it, you can either do 2 title fights, and there's no guarantee that's still going to sell. You could put great fights together with Joanna Jędrzejczyk, a challenger. Same thing with a flyweight or a bantamweight fight, it's not going to sell. When you look at Nick Diaz, traditionally he sells very large. George St-Pierre sells very large. At least Nick Diaz has that commitment that he's going to return, wants to return. His suspension would be up. And obviously there's the novelty of the whole 209. 208's the card that I'm more worried about because it's such a quick turnaround after 207. You're not going to be able to throw anything on it. And when I think, okay, what else could they do? Tony Ferguson versus Khabib, great fight, but does that sell? Probably not. And there's no way they strip McGregor this early anyhow. So they're hurting. They have good fights they can put together, but what are they going to sell with?
There's a Fox card in there in January as well. There's a fight night the eve of the Super Bowl in Houston.
And you're using BJ Penn and using stars like that right before.
Well, I think that's indicative. The fact that Yair Rodriguez is headlining against BJ Penn. Granted, it's an FS1 card, but that's the Sunday night of the NFL championship games where previously we had Conor McGregor, Dennis Seaver, Dominic Cruz, TJ Dillashaw. I mean, BJ Penn and Yair Rodriguez, it's a fine main event. I don't think it's going to be at the level of the prior two that they had on those Sunday night shows. One other option is at middleweight and what is going to come out of this, because we expect Michael Bisping to fight Yoel Romero at a date to be determined. I think it would take some incentivizing for Bisping to fight on one of those cards, but you have Romero ready. You also have options with a Luke Rockhold, who now was hurt. He's not going to be fighting this weekend. He'll be ready to come back. He can be put in a good spot, especially if he's ready to go in California, which would be a natural, and possibly fight Gegard Mousasi. But again, that's not headlining a pay-per-view, in my opinion.
No, couldn't agree more. I was going to say, if you could have Luke Rockhold, I'm not sure the severity of his knee injury, but if he's good to go for 208, I assume you put him on there.
He's trying to rehab his knee so he doesn't need surgery. So he's trying that way and doing his own recovery. But yeah, it's still a knee injury, and you don't want to rush that back. Look what happened with Michael Bisping when he tried to avoid.
You also don't want to take the chance of risking your headline card with someone who's pulled out of his last fight with a knee injury and is now rehabbing a knee injury. So, I mean, there's a lot of risk. And the problem is, if you don't load up the whole card and you lose your main event, you are in big trouble. So they need to throw a bunch of stars on there. Not just stars that are California market, but stars that are, big in the UFC in general. So they're going to have a tough task on their hands, John, here, trying to fill out those cards before a Rousey or McGregor could come back. But I have confidence that they'll be able to get enough pieces together to make it work.
And my final point on this, because we discussed this on the MMA Report this week, that you can catch at FightNetwork.com, is the idea of using CM Punk a second time, as we've just outlined. For these first few months, not a depth of options for the UFC, of viable draws on pay-per-view. This past year, CM Punk established himself as one, doing north of 400,000 buys for UFC 203, and I would say more than half of those buys are attributable to CM Punk fighting Mickey Gall. So when you're looking at these options, and hey, we do not want to be doing sub 300,000 buy pay-per-views, is there enough of a curiosity of Punk fighting on a pay-per-view, not headlining a pay-per-view, when you're trying to bulk up these cards? Because I see CM Punk being on a first or second fight of the pay-per-view at the Barclays Center as an option that you're definitely entertaining.
Couldn't agree more. And when he spoke to Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour, he said exactly that. Ariel said, well, when would you potentially want to come back? And he was like, well, I want to enjoy the holidays, and I'd like to return for January, February. Well, the UFC's running some shows and around that same time frame, and they could use your help. It's all about appropriate matchup for him. People will complain we don't want to see him, but they're still going to tune in. They need to bring in somebody and don't take someone who's already under contract with UFC. And quite frankly, Robin always uses that. If you're a star, you could fight an adamant Rod. People are going to tune in. You might not agree with it, but CM Punk is a star. I'll tell you what, I've watched worse fights than that, John.
We will find out what happens in the future for CM Punk as well. What do you feel are going to headline some of these cards in January and February? Leave us a comment below in the comment section. For Cody Saptic, I'm John Pollock.